What's up, Guardians? Profane here. Thanks for checking out the video. At some point, it's inevitable. You're up against one of the many raid or dungeon bosses in Destiny, and you run out of ammo. In an act of desperation, you swap over to your primary weapon, in hopes that it'll be strong enough to finish off the boss. In your time of need, you do what most every player does. You grab your preferred exotic primary and go to town. But is your favorite exotic primary the most optimal choice when it comes to damage output? Today we'll try to help answer this question by testing out how every exotic primary performs up against raid and dungeon bosses. We're testing 52 different exotic weapons, and some of these, I promise, will surprise you. Now, some of these exotics aren't necessarily crafted to deal out maximum damage. Some of these are designed to be crucible, or add clear weapons, or to support other teammates. With that said, we tried to reduce all of the variables in today's testing, so we're not using any debuffs, we're not using any solar artifact mods, we are using a Well of Radiance and Luna factions to give each weapon the best quality of reload speed. We have applied 3 weapon surges to match each energy type, and we are testing each of these weapons against our control unit, Verglas. Verglas provides 2 benefits when testing weapons. It lets us see how the accuracy of these weapons are going to hold up against flinch, since the boss will be shooting at us 99% of the time. And it also lets us get a better scope of what these weapons can achieve, since it's a 30-second damage phase, with the boss being within point-blank range. With all that out of the way, let's take a look at how these exotic primaries performed, starting with the least performing exotics and working our way up to the top. We start with the Verglas curve, a stasis bow not really known as a DPS weapon, as its primary functions are more suited towards general ad clear, and its damage numbers definitely reflect that. Next up is the Ace of Spades, another weapon that's mainly oriented around ad clear, and since we can't kill anything during a damage phase, we can't proc its bonus firefly damage. The Lumina is up next. I didn't have high expectations with this weapon going into this test because it is of course a support weapon that is only beneficial when in a fire team. The Sunshot is another ad clear oriented weapon. It can be pretty lethal against champions and rank and file enemies, but its effects just don't work out nearly as well against bosses. The Trinity Ghoul is in a similar position as the Sunshot. It's an extraordinary add clear weapon, but when it comes to damage, it's on the low end of the totem pole. The MIDA multi-tool is a fantastic weapon in the Crucible, but that's pretty much where its benefits start and stop, as it just doesn't put up much fight in the PvE. The Bad Juju is one of the sweetest looking weapons in Destiny, but its ominous appearance isn't going to help this add clear pulse rifle get more damage. The Wicked Implement is up next, a stasis scout rifle, and honestly it benefits more when on a stasis build, because stasis shards overflow the magazine. But even with that benefit, it's still a subpar DPS weapon. The Last Word makes for a really funny exotic to be on this testing block, a weapon with complete Crucible afflictions. But I mean, hey, it's outperformed those other exotics. The Skyburner's Oath is up next. Its biggest benefit is that it deals bonus damage against Cabal enemies, and it pierces their shields. It's got some good kick, and even scorches its targets, but at the end of the day, against raid and dungeon bosses, not so glorious of a weapon. Hierarchy of Needs is up next, a solar bow that really surprised me, and not in the good way. I was expecting that the guidance rings would have really propelled this weapon's damage, but it just didn't. Up next, the Crimson. This hand cannon is certainly more suited in the Crucible, but it can be a smooth hand cannon to use against rank and file enemies. When it comes to bosses though, it just doesn't cut the chut. The Jade Rabbit is in a similar situation as the Crimson, a weapon with deep ties to the Crucible, and it performs better from a distance. It would be more suited to go up against a boss that is more susceptible to precision damage, but against Farazia, the Jade Rabbit definitely underperforms. Collective Obligation is next in line, and it actually did better than I thought it would. It was tricky getting the leeching abilities to trigger on a solar build, but thankfully I had a heavy weapon at hand with destabilizing rounds. Having this leeching ability is going to be important to the Collective's ability to deal more damage, as it roughly provides about 70,000 extra points. And coming up to the plate next is the Symmetry Arc Scout Rifle. I had expected that the Revolution charges would have dealt more damage, but ultimately this exotic just kind of fizzled. The Centrifuse is another arc weapon that's great at ad clear, but its traits just don't facilitate it to be a good DPS weapon, leaving it in the same boat as the Symmetry. The Hard Light is up next, a weapon that can rotate through all three light energies, and deals bonus damage on its ricochet rounds. I cycled this exotic through twice, one test to get direct shots against the boss, and the second just to do ricochet damage, and I was surprised to see a 100,000 point difference between the two. The Vigilance wing is up next, another weapon with deep ties to the Crucible, which by decree means that it's not going to perform as well in the PvE. The Necrochasm is a weapon that I didn't expect to see so far down on this list, but since its main traits revolve around final blows, it's much more suited to be an ad clear weapon. The Monte Carlo is an exotic that I really expected to see better numbers out of. Outside of the bayonet damage, the Monte Carlo didn't do much at all, only putting up around 370 points of damage, most of that coming from the bayonet. Up next, the Cryosthesia, a fun little stasis sidearm that freezes targets, but only after final blows, so we were only able to trigger this once. My biggest issue with this weapon is that since it has an alternate firing mode, it doesn't automatically begin reloading when the magazine is empty. And now, the Suros regime. Now, this exotic has two separate firing modes. One is dual speed loader, and the other is spinning up, both having different rates of fire. And it came as no surprise that spinning up dealt a considerable amount of extra damage. Next up, the Dead Man's Tail. I love the looks of this exotic, and its reload animations are really top notch, but when you're not knocking off Guardians' heads, the Dead Man's Tail is kinda lackluster. The no time to explain moves us beyond the 400,000 threshold. It got an assist from its portal buddy to do so, but you gotta do what you gotta do. And now, the Thorn. I had high expectations about this exotic. I was really excited about it actually, especially with as many as 40 rounds that can be in the magazine. But to my dismay, those 40 rounds, plus poisoning effects, doesn't actually contribute to that much damage. Moving on, we have the Polaris Lance. I love the explosions that this weapon can create. They deal out a lot of extra damage against champions, and it makes it a great weapon to clear out adds. But against Pharazia, it's a little bit difficult to maintain those explosions, making the Polaris Lance a weapon that's more suitable against bosses that are susceptible to precision damage. The Traveler's Chosen Sidearm put up a lot more damage than I thought it would have, considering its primary benefits boost the regeneration of your abilities. Nevertheless, considering this is a sidearm, it put up some pretty good numbers. Up next, the Risk Runner. Not really designed to put out a lot of damage, but more so designed to keep you protected when taking out rank and file enemies when taking on a lot of arc damage. But since this boss doesn't inflict arc damage, the Risk Runner wasn't able to maintain its arc conductions, so it didn't really have a good opportunity to excel. Even if it had, the Risk Runner is just not an optimal DPS weapon. And now we have the Trespasser sidearm. When this weapon originally released, it was 100% a Crucible weapon, but then when it came back, it was given some added bonuses to make it effective against rank and file enemies, but against bosses, not so much. The Hawkmoon is up next, and I was a little iffy as to where to put this exotic, because its damage numbers are extremely inconsistent. It has randomly assigned lucky shots that deal bonus damage, and since the recoil of Hawkmoon is really wide and its stability is not the greatest, it makes it very difficult to get consistent shots up against this boss, causing those damage numbers to be lower more often than not. And now we check out the Tiku or Taiku's Divination, another solar bow that works in the exact opposite way of the hierarchy of needs. And it actually works out a lot better, as this bow puts out a considerable amount of extra damage. Monarque breaks past Tiku's divination, utilizing its poisonous effects to put out a decent bit of damage, but ultimately, most bows just aren't all that effective when it comes to damage. Next up, the Fighting Lion. Now, this is a grenade launcher, but it's treated as a primary weapon, so it has unlimited ammo. It also amplifies the damage of your other weapons, so I was surprised to see it perform as well as it did on its own. The Rat King is up next, a weapon that wasn't able to fully maximize on its own potential, because it relies on other rats to deal bonus damage, and since we're solo, that just ain't happening. Still yet, the Rat King put out a lot more damage than a lot of other exotic primaries. The Huckleberry is up next, and this weapon was a little tricky during damage phases, because you can't really maintain a 3-stack of Rampage. Nevertheless, the Huckleberry did alright, considering it's much more of a crucible weapon. The Graviton Lance is up next, putting up some decent numbers. I was a little concerned that the faster rate of fire would have resulted in smaller damage numbers, but not bad, Graviton, not bad at all. And now, the Manticore. This is such a weird weapon, but since it deals bonus damage while you are levitating, the Manticore was able to put up some pretty good numbers. It's just that when you use this weapon, you're taking yourself out of cover and putting yourself in harm's way. So without the benefits of a Well of Radiance, the Manticore is probably going to get you killed. The sweet business gets us beyond the 600,000 point mark. I was honestly expecting a bit more out of this auto rifle, considering it now has explosive rounds on every 4th shot, but all things considered, it did alright. Up next, the Cerberus+1. I was really surprised that this hybrid auto rifle performed as well as it did, and that it dealt more damage than the sweet business. Up next, another auto rifle, the Quicksilver Storm. This strand auto rifle comes with a grenade launcher, allowing us to shoot out 3 bonus strand grenades, which helps this weapon put out a decent amount of damage. And now, the Wishender, the only primary bow that can hold its own against bosses, putting up almost 700,000 points of damage. Not bad, not bad. We've got the Devil's Ruin sidearm up next. This hybrid sidearm charges up and fires out trace rifle beams that actually puts in some work, as this sidearm puts up almost 700,000 points of damage. The Osteostriga breaks us into the top 10 primary exotics. A really fun weapon, registering in at just under 700,000 points, but the key contributor is having its magazine overflowed before going into damage. Up next, the Final Warning. I was really surprised at how well this sidearm performed, but with its charged up unraveling shots, it really puts in some work, and really started making me second guess myself on not using this weapon more. The Revision 0 is up next. This pulse rifle features an alternate sniper mode, which contributed greatly to this exotic's success, helping it propel beyond 700,000 points of damage, and with a bit better accuracy it could do even better. And now, Tommy's Matchbook. As it burns you, this weapon deals bonus damage, which is a considerable amount, considering this weapon puts up almost 800,000 points of damage. But the only way to properly use this to your advantage would be to be in a Well of Radiance. And now the Malfeasance. This amazing hand cannon got some significant reworks 2 seasons ago, which has really helped this weapon excel against high-ranking enemies with the addition of Vorpal, allowing it to put up nearly 800,000 points of damage, numbers that could be greatly improved upon by using Lucky Pants with a Hunter. We break into our top 5 primary exotics with the next weapon, the Vex Mythoclast. This Vex-inspired weapon has 2 modes, one that functions like an auto rifle and the other functioning like a linear fusion rifle. When adding in the linear fusion shots, the Vex Mythoclast puts up some insane numbers, almost reaching 800,000 points of damage. And that's without having the Catalyst unlocked, which would have added to that damage. Next up is the Tarrabah. This solar SMG comes with Ravenous Beast, a mode that provides a faster rate of fire and bonus damage, allowing this weapon to put up some incredible numbers, putting up on average 800,000 points of damage. We're down to our last 3 exotic primaries, and we're looking at the Outbreak Perfected next. This pulse rifle includes nanites, which generate off of sustained precision damage, tracking down and inflicting more damage onto targets. This trait benefits the most off of final blows, but even on sustained fire against a boss like Farazia, this pulse rifle puts in some work. The Touch of Malice is up next. This scout rifle deals bonus damage on its last round, but that comes at a cost. It also generates blights after sustained precision damage, giving you an alternate mode to fire off this overpowered blast. The safety of a Well of Radiance is certainly needed when going all out with the Touch of Malice, but in the end, it pays off because this weapon deals out almost 900,000 points of damage. And now, our big winner chicken dinner. The #1 exotic primary to damage raid and dungeon bosses. The Sturm exotic hand cannon. Surprised, aren't you? Well, I was. This hand cannon gets overflowed with special overcharged rounds when you defeat enemies with the Drain sidearm. This can provide you with as many as 99 rounds in the magazine, and when those overcharged rounds fire out, you're hitting targets for 27,000 points. Now, it's impossible to get 99 rounds off in 30 seconds, but even with 30 to 40 rounds, the Sturm puts up an easy million points of damage against Pharazia. Just imagine how much more damage that the Sturm would do with a Lucky Pants Hunter build, something that we'll be exploring in an upcoming video, along with updated damage testing of every exotic energy and every exotic heavy weapon, so be sure to stay tuned to the channel for when those drop. For now though, that concludes today's test on how every primary exotic weapon performs against raid and dungeon bosses. So how did your favorite exotic primary do in today's test? Let us know down in the comments below, and let me know if any of these surprised you. I hope you've enjoyed today's video and found it helpful. If so, then be sure to hit that like button below, along with the subscribe button if you're new. Both are greatly appreciated, and both really do help support the channel. If you're a new Light Guardian just starting your journey, or a battle-hardened veteran just looking for a new home, then be sure to check out the Discord link in the description below and join one of the greatest communities in all of Destiny. I wish you all the best of luck throughout the rest of this season, and until next time, Guardians, this has been Profane, wishing you all some happy holidays and some happy hunting.